Hey, good morning. Welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. Whoa. Wow, that'll get you going, especially if you have your earbuds in and the volume is at 10. Whatever the coffee hasn't achieved yet, that can blast on my brain has awoken the last of the dormant cells that are doing their best to rise here in a different time zone. What's going on, people? We're back together again 24 hours later. We're going to give you some updates around Harvey, and we're also going to hold on a second here. We're going to continue to explore some of the headlines that are still happening out there. There are a ton of plates that are spinning in the U.S. and the world at large. So we're going to try to do our best to give me 1 second here. We're going to try to do our best to stay abreast of what's going on and inform you to the best of my ability with as much wit and aplomb as possible about what's happening here every single day. I'm Robert Phoenix, and of course you're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame. And it's been a very interesting couple days just on a personal front. Being here in California, it's amazing how the weather is so different than the weather in Texas. And I don't mind the weather in Texas. I actually like hot weather. And once you understand that it's going to be hot, then you can just kind of make some adjustments and figure out how you're going to get through it. And we adapt. We're humans. We're adaptable. This is what happens. But it's definitely a paradigm shift being out here with, the breeze and 70-degree temperatures. And it's been a pretty good trip so far. And wrapping it up and getting ready to head back to Texas, where things are drying out, which brings us to Harvey, the latest. If you're just waking up or you've been up for a couple of hours, the storm has significantly dissipated and is actually moving east, which is what we talked about yesterday. It has gone through or is currently wrapping up, going through the Beaumont area of Texas, where, of course, there's huge amounts of oil production, and is headed towards Lake Charles and New Orleans, who can barely afford 6 to 7 inches of rain, let alone 10. I don't think they're going to get that much, but if we look at what's going on in New Orleans now, they can, let's put it this way. They are in the midst, in New Orleans, of completely revamping that city. And the revampment of New Orleans actually started with Hurricane Katrina. And when I say revampment, I'm not really talking revampment in a positive sense. I'm talking revampment in the sense that they're changing the character, the face, the flavor, the culture of New Orleans. And I've been following this through the guys down at Battle Nola Radio, Nathan Lawrence and Goyam, who's his co-host. And they've been just absolutely drilling down on the smart cities, safe cities, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 that's being orchestrated in New Orleans. And it's being orchestrated at a pretty rapid clip. And the Aspen Institute has been engaged at not only a think tank level, but a deployment level. And so what they're witnessing is this transformation of this once historic city into becoming something very different than what we knew and understood for many years about New Orleans. So what do I mean by that? It means that local businesses are being forced out. The big chains are coming in. The big restaurant chains are coming in. Waffle House is coming in. Parking has become almost impossible in downtown New Orleans, just like it's become nearly impossible in Austin, Texas. I mean, you can park downtown, but it's so difficult, and the spots are few and far between. So of course they force you into the parking garages, which are, it beats paying a ticket, but they're still pretty pricey. So all of this is part of the transformation of living and urban living in and throughout the United States. And this is happening all over the place as part of the Smart Cities / Safe Cities initiative. So New Orleans is pretty far down the road on this. So I don't believe that Harvey or the remnants of Harvey will cause inordinate damage to New Orleans, although the media will do their best to pump it up and get people adrenalized and have them coming from the continued state of fight or flight, which we're all being triggered every single day. Every single day, it's either fight or flight, fight or flight. We're either going to kick somebody's ass or we're going to get the high ground. That's it. And, we are living off of a consistent strain and drain of our adrenaline to the point where our thyroids are taxed, our adrenals are shot, and we're all running around trying to pump ourselves up and keep going with a lot of different substances and just habituated types of rituals that we have going on. Coffee, of course, is one of the greatest, and I indulge in it on a daily basis, but not much. Anyway, what I'm trying to share with you here is that we are in the midst of a major operation. Huge, so many levels. But really, where it's all boiling down to, if we could just distill it, if we could just get it to the one point where we can make heads or tails over where all this is going, it's that ultimately we are going to be herded into the megalopolises, the mega cities. Here I am in California. I'm in the East Bay. It's not a sleepy little town. It was at one point in time, Walnut Creek. And I'm hanging out with my mother as I take care of some family business. And we're driving around, and she's showing me these new developments, some of which are not far from where she's living. And there's a plot of land not far from her place, and the amount of buildings or living spaces that they are cramming into this plot of land is really kind of mind-blowing. So what we're witnessing, and normally the whole idea of the stack 'em and pack 'em, which is taking place all over America. Go to any semi-major city. That's been happening in Austin for years now, where they're just completely transmogrifying downtown Austin. They're creating the stack 'em and pack 'ems, which are roughly about 500 square foot apartments. In some cases, even smaller. And essentially cramming people into these very confined and contained spaces. Now, with the stack 'em and pack 'ems in a place like Austin, or to even some extent Walnut Creek here, of course they'll always have the amenities that are at the bottom of the stack 'em and the pack 'em, because they want you to be able to literally drop down an elevator, right, or flight of stairs, or however you want to get to the bottom, and then be able to basically have about a 250-foot perimeter, 300-foot perimeter that you can just go from place to place to place to place. You can get your coffee, you can get your Chinese food, you can get your shoe fix, you can get a haircut. It's all right there. It's all right there, all self-contained, and people will not necessarily have to get in their cars and drive across town and be able to pick or choose or experience whatever they want in terms of services. It'll all be very centralized. So, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This is the plan. This is the model. It's already well underway in New Orleans. So I doubt that we're going to get a huge amount of Harvey hitting New Orleans and basically undoing the momentum that's taking place and transforming one of America's most colorful cities. Well, that brings us to Houston, because Houston, on the other hand, while it is part of the great megalopolis, the jewel in the eye of the global urban planners, a massive city that will stretch from Dallas all the way through Austin, down to San Antonio, and then creating the Texan Triangle down in Houston. Houston will obviously undergo some massive changes as it relates to the infrastructure of the city itself. Which means that if the idea and the goal is to create an Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 beachhead in Texas in a way that they've never done it before, they now have the opportunity through the rebuilding of Houston. Houston is a very interesting place in terms of its architecture and zoning, of which they've had very little. And if you can ask any Houstonian about the layout of the city, and they'll roll their eyes or they'll laugh, because if you can see in Houston, you'll find high rises, and then you'll see 2 or 3 really small houses kind of next to the high rise, and then you'll see maybe a factory, and then you'll see another high rise. I mean, Houston is this hodgepodge of unchecked zoning. So I'm not sure if the flooding is going to completely redo the map of Houston to the effect that it's going to undo a lot of that strange compression of different needs, different lifestyles, living space, commercial space, etc. But it might. I will tell you that the areas that are affected by the floods, keep your eye on those areas, because they may absolutely be designated as places where people will not be able to return to their homes. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that almost the entire state of Texas, basically from Austin south, is part of a floodplain. And even here in Austin, we have areas where people live inside of the floodplain. And when we do get these really powerful, really intense rains, the houses inside the floodplain, and I saw this 3 years ago, they're flooded. They're done. And this doesn't happen frequently, but every 10, 15 years, they get pounded. Since I've been here, it's been happening a lot. Anyway, so ultimately, a lot of these people in the floodplain areas inside of Austin were forced to leave, and they're not going back. And the same can be said for these areas in Houston. So keep your eye on how this evolves, and how FEMA and the federal government are involved in the redistribution of the population inside of Houston. Just keep your eye on that. Now, as far as what's happening on a national level with Trump and his leadership around all this, what's interesting about Trump is that in his chart, he's got all those planets in Cancer, right? He's got Saturn in Cancer, he's got Venus in Cancer, he has Mercury in Cancer. So the Cancerian vibe is pretty strong inside of his chart. Now, when it comes to crisis, emergency, and this whole idea of coming to the aid of others, which is what America has done throughout the years, since America is a Cancerian country, we have come to the aid. We come to the aid of others now under very, how shall we say, dubious circumstances. But that's a whole other story. This is actually where Trump can excel, believe it or not, because he has this inherently in his chart. Now, Newsweek has put out an article here that says after how floods can sink a presidency. And a lot of presidents have been, not a lot, a number of presidents have been either bolstered by a disaster and a flood, or their legacy has taken a significant hit. Now, here's an example. This is what Newsweek points out. Let me just read this paragraph here. It says Trump is acutely aware of the legacy of Hurricane Katrina and how the botched federal response marked perhaps the low point of George W. Bush's administration. When the Category 3 storm slammed into Louisiana in 2005, Bush was in San Diego attending a birthday party for, get ready for it, Senator John McCain. And he chose a flyover of the chaos in New Orleans rather than touching down. When he eventually got around to visiting the submerged city, his praise of Michael D. Brown, the hapless administrator of FEMA, only made things worse. His remark, "You're doing a heck of a job, Brownie," became an enduring reminder of how out of touch Bush was at that point. Brown, whose previous job before coming to FEMA was at the International Arabian Horse Association, had no real disaster qualifications, save for being close friends with Joe Alaba, a longtime Bush aide who was the president's first FEMA director. Now, George H.W. Bush's legacy as president is almost bulletproof because he had to, quote-unquote, deal with 9/11. Okay? Deal in 9/11. Or deal with it. So he's kind of bulletproof. But he was horrible. He was a horrible president. And the only reason Michael Brown got that job is because he was friends with a group of Saudi Arabians that George Bush was connected to. That's how he got to know Michael Brown. It wasn't through Joe Alba, although Joe Alba was an advocate for Michael Brown. It was really the Saudi Arabian connection that got him that gig. And that was a disaster. It was a total disaster. And of course, what happened after Katrina, we talked about that yesterday, was another disaster. So here we are. What's going to happen? What will be Trump's legacy around Harvey? Will he rise to the occasion? Or will he be too bogged down by the storm and the ongoing flooding of leaks in the White House? Isn't this interesting? All these metaphors around water, leaks, floods. I mean, we are in a period where the Neptunian language for what's going on is it's rich, to say the least. So here's another piece. This is exactly what I was talking about that's connected to this Newsweek article. And it talks about Houston is drowning in its freedom from regulations. Remember that. Houston is drowning in its freedom from regulations. This is a city that has had absolutely zero urban planning. I mean, it's there, but it's there to the extent that it's been all over the place. So I'm going to read this here. This is by Steve Russell. This is an opinion piece for Newsweek. We do value our freedom here in Texas, as I write from soggy Central Texas. Let me just find this again. It's going to be as I write from soggy Central Texas. The cable news is showing people floating down Buffalo Bayou on their principles, proud residents of the largest city in these United States that did not grow in accordance with zoning ordinances. The feeling there was that persons who own real estate should be free to develop it as they wish. Houston, also known as the Bayou City, is a great location because of its access to international shipping in the Gulf of Mexico. It is not a great location for building because all of its pervious cover. If water could easily sink into the ground, there would be less of it ripping down Houston's rivers. Just a week ago were overcrowded streets. In less free cities, the jackbooted thugs in the zoning department impose limits on the amount of impervious cover in a development. Some of the limits can be finessed by lining parking lots with bricks turned sideways, so grass can be planted in the holes. If you meet the impervious cover standards, you still might get your entire plot checked into the round file because some computer has determined that your business plan will attract automobile traffic in excess of the carrying capacity of nearby roads. Faceless bureaucrats have no respect for the inalienable right of every American to park his car on the public streets during rush hour. I got snarky in the law school class where I first heard that Houston had no zoning, wishing out loud I could build a rendering plant in the so posh River Oaks neighborhood. I was quickly slapped down by the freedom fighters in the state, or in the class, who informed me that there are no rendering plants in River Oaks because the real estate costs too much. Did I not understand that the market regulates land use much more effectively than bureaucrats could? River Oaks remains some of the most expensive real estate in the U.S., a model of what could be done with appropriate planning. Developers accomplish their ends by deed restrictions and gentlemen's agreements. Homes were required to exceed 7,000 back in the 1920s, and deed restrictions even specified allowable architectural styles. Gentlemen of the times excluded Jews and Negroes and similar undesirables. After Houston annexed River Oaks in 1927, the suburb became a neighborhood, but it remained a haven for swell folks, as lightly regulated by custom as Houston was unregulated by law. Impervious cover in Houston, meanwhile, has increased, continues to increase. I look at my television and see the streets are flooded. The San Jacinto River and the Buffalo Bayou are out of their banks. People are wading through waist-deep water, carrying a few possessions, children and pets. The catastrophic flooding is the result of 20 to 30 inches of rain. Adding to the water in the streets now, the Army Corps of Engineers has announced several reservoirs in the area will be opening floodgates to avoid failure of the dams. This is the next stage of what's going to happen with Harvey. And the floodgates are expected to stay open for weeks because so much water will be coming downstream. Additionally, the National Weather Service is warning Houston to expect another 15 to 25 inches of rain. We'll see about that. As I write this, Hurricane Harvey is ambling off toward Louisiana, taking with him the high winds and the danger of storm surges, but leaving rain and more rain. Critics in the cheap seats are complaining that Houston issued no mandatory evacuation order. That would only occur to somebody who's never sat in the parking lot that Loop 610 becomes at least twice a day when people are just going to and from work. Putting the entire population on the roads at the same time, roads that are prone to flash floods when rains are nowhere near these historic levels would mean not just inconvenience, but fatalities. There would be at least as many rescues to be done as there are now, but there would be more dangerous rescues. Agreeing that mandatory evacuation would have driven up the casualty numbers, currently in single digits, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo told MSNBC that half the population would refuse to evacuate, but enough would do so to cause massive traffic jams that would leave everyone stuck in them, extreme danger and flash floods. Houston was built without regard for carrying out the capacity of its roads, just as it was built without regulating the amount of impervious cover that would be shedding water into streets, storm sewers, rivers, and Buffalo Bayou. Texans do value their freedom. So this is exactly what I'm talking about, is the supposed lack of zoning, or there is a lack of zoning regulation inside of Houston, but now it's being used against the people of Houston. It's being used against the people of Texas. And what the author is sharing here, Steve Russell, by the way, Russell is one of those Illuminati names. Although I'm not saying Steve Russell's a member of the Illuminati. I'm just telling you, it's one of those names that Fritz Springmeier mentioned, amongst others. So what he's implying here is that Texans need less freedom. People need less freedom, and they need more planning. And of course, the next level of planning is Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and the Smart Cities program. And you wait and see what happens in Houston. Once all the water dissipates and clears, and once they figure out that the levees and the dams are in a place where they can handle the pressure, of course, they're going to look at the debris, and we're going to see shots of debris. We're going to see what's been left behind with the flood. And we will be flooded with that imagery. Absolutely flooded with that imagery. And people will sit at home aghast, looking at the screen. Oh my God, oh my God. Look at what happened. We can't let that happen here. Oh no. We cannot. We need more planning. We need less cars. We need more impervious ground cover. This is essentially, Americans get reprogrammed through trauma. And we all dial into the trauma channel. So when we see this happening, we see this taking place. Somebody sitting at home saying, oh my God, that's terrible. That's terrible. And all of a sudden, here come the change agents. Here they come, and they come into town, and they begin to bring up these images of Houston. They bring up the images of the flood and the debris and the people with their their cat carrier above their head, and a child with a teddy bear, and they begin to just use this as a point of rewiring people's brains and getting people to sign off through the process of consent to have their area reconfigured, your municipalities reconfigured. Because nobody wants to go through another Houston and another Harvey. And it's op-eds like this that wind up, and this is not just the only one, I'm sure there will be dozens more, that will drive this agenda forward. So keep your eyes on what happens with Houston over the course of the next 2 to 3 months. And we'll check in. We'll check in from time to time, because one of the things that happens is we have the memory hole. Are we talking at all about any of the child abuse stories or Pizzagate or anything that was really just bubbling beneath the surface? Are we talking about Chris Cornell anymore? Are we talking about Chester Bennington anymore? No, we don't. It just goes down the memory hole, just like a sewer, right? Just flows right down the sewer, goes right into the sewage waste system, and is recycled for another news event to pop up so that we can churn on it. So, we'll come back to Houston over the course of this week. We'll get more updates. We'll see what's going on. But, over the next few months, I'm going to be checking back in and giving you updates as to what's happening in that city and how Houston will be remade. Because it is going to be a beachhead in Texas. Because Texas is the one state in the union that does not have the same type of mindset than nearly any other state in the United States. And Texans pride themselves on being able to take care of business, being self-determined, and having the federal government stay out of their business. So we're going to keep an eye on this story moving forward as Houston is transformed via Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, the Safe City, Smart Cities initiative, which is in full swing. All right, let's get into some other material here before we sign off very quickly. It looks like Steve Bannon is now engaged in a war with Donald Trump, and we predicted this. It wouldn't take long before Bannon, who supported Trump and supported the MAGA, Make America Great Again, and said he would support Trump from the outside and he could do more damage from the outside. Well, he's fired the first shot across the bow. There's a race going on in the Senate in Alabama between Roy Moore and Luther Strange. Roy Moore is a judge, former judge. He is a strict constitutionalist. He is a Christian, probably a Christian first and a constitutionalist second. And he presided over the famous case around, I believe it was Moses and the Ten Commandments, a statue that was being threatened in Alabama. He's going up against a guy by the name of Luther Strange. And this is for Jeff Sessions' seat as a senator now. So Sessions in the White House doing his very best to recriminalize marijuana and seize as much assets as possible. He's left his seat in Alabama. So Luther Strange, which is a strange combination of Dr. Strange and Lex Luthor. I mean, he sounds like a comic book villain, is up against Roy Moore. And Trump has been backing Luther Strange. It has been for a while. Bannon is backing Roy Moore. So here we go. Here is the first Trump versus Bannon square off that we're seeing and probably will continue to see as the Trump administration moves more and more and more towards a globalist center and away from all the wonderful campaign promises that Donald Trump made while he was running for president of the United States. I'll just read this pretty quickly. This is from the Washington Examiner here. And it says Steve Bannon breaks with Trump over Roy Moore. Let me just come back to this story here. It says, give me 1 second. I'm not using my normal computer, so this is a little tricky thing. Okay, recently departed White House chief strategist Steve Bannon is backing Roy Moore over Trump's pick, President Trump's pick. Luther Strange in an upcoming special election for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' seat as an Alabama senator. According to a report Monday evening, Bannon, now the head of Breitbart News, told the Conservative Action Project in a closed-door meeting in Washington, D.C. last week he would back the former state Supreme Court justice over the acting senator. However, Bannon's differences in opinion is not necessarily meant as a jab to Trump. Bannon told a group of conservatives it was meant as a stand against Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who supports Strange in the race, according to Politico. So this is how Bannon is parsing it, because McConnell is a guy that supports Strange, and he doesn't support McConnell because he believes McConnell is leading the charge of the rhinos, which is very strange because McConnell's wife is I believe it's Elaine Chao, is in the Trump administration. Bannon told the group of conservatives it was meant as a stand against Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who supports Strange in the race. according to Politico. Bannon said the election is a chance for staunch conservatives to stand up to the establishment GOP, including McConnell, who has recently sparred with Trump over Congress's inability to move on major legislation. So Bannon is targeting McConnell, but as a result, he's also targeting Trump. This will not be the last public policy or candidate that Bannon will be in conflict with around Trump. Remember, astrologically, Bannon and Trump are in opposite signs, astrologically. Trump, the Gemini, Bannon, the Sagittarius. And when opposite sign occurs and opposite sex, there's great attraction. There is chemistry. When opposite sign occurs in the same sex, there is rivalry. And that is a classic statement that comes down from Linda Goodman, one of the goddesses of astrology. So one of the things that's happened here is that Sebastian Gorka, Professor Sebastian Gorka, another one of the brainy conservatives who is trying to implement a nationalist and American program inside of the White House. Well, he literally got kicked off the grounds of the White House. So Trump and the people around him, mostly the generals, are becoming more and more insulated. Trump becoming more isolated. And they're making these really hardline decisions about who can be there and who can't be there. Gorka can't even come onto the White House grounds anymore. And he's come out and said that, a lot of people in the White House don't support Make America Great Again. Now, I always thought that Make America Great Again was kind of corny, to be honest with you. And I know it plays really, really well in the flyover states. And it makes a great acronym, MAGA. Magnanimous, magnificent, magisterial. All those mag words. Magnesium, an incredibly precious metal, expensive metal. And while I agree with a lot of the sentiments that are associated with this, and while I agree that I believe we need to deconstruct the globalist freight train headed in our direction, there's also something a little bit corny about it. Make America Great Again. But I get it. As a campaign statement, it's brilliant, to be honest with you. So Gorka, now that he's out of the White House, is saying, hey, look, there are a lot of people inside the White House that don't have this agenda. So if you're somebody that voted for Trump and voted for the agenda, if you voted to make America great again, if you voted to bring jobs home, if you voted to stem the tide of immigration, if you voted to have your taxes reformed so you could have more money, so that you could use that money to maybe start a business, create more wealth, if you voted to have less regulations in starting your own business, if you voted for all those things, if you voted for better health care, the dismantling of the behemoth known as Obamacare, or the mandate/mandatory tax, guess what? You probably aren't represented all that well at this point. Let's be clear about that. You probably won't be represented. So what do you do now? What are Trump's deplorables going to do now? What are the quote unquote common American man, American woman, great values, really trying to get a foothold in a very turbulent time of change, where genetics, where technology, where everything is taking us into literally the twilight zone. From the appearances of our bodies to the virtual realms in which we'll theoretically inhabit. This is a really powerful time for a lot of people, and they may not actually see what's happening. They may not understand CRISPR and gene splicing, transhumanism, the 5G electronic cage, the digitization of assets, the end of money, ultimately the chip. They may not understand it to the extent that people who track this stuff do. But I guarantee you they feel it. And they feel it at an intuitive level. An intuitive level. So what are they going to do now that their representatives inside of the White House have been dismissed? How are they going to garner support for what they believe Trump would stand for? And that's a big question. That's a big question. As they address their existential fear. Another really interesting development, John Bolton, who is about as neoconservative as it can get, is another guy that's banned from the White House. John Bolton is not allowed on the White House grounds. And this is a guy who is just frothing at the mouth back in the Bush administration. He's got that funny mustache that kind of goes over his lip, his top lip. You know, his mustache looks like one of those kinds of, like when you go to a car wash and you're going out of the car wash and they have those big strips that are hanging down from the top of the car wash, and they hit your front end, they hit your bumper, they hit your hood, and then they hit your windshield and they go over the top of your car. That's what John Bolton's mustache looks like. Anyway, he's on Fox, he's all over Fox, but he's not allowed in the White House. So there's some very interesting things taking place there. Another little known factoid is that Trump has lifted the ban on the militarization of the police. This is a really important factoid that you need to be aware of. Because, and we've been talking about this now for a while, when you have the left and the right going after each other, frothing at the mouth, being engaged in these really vociferous, violent public debates, demonstrations, and what do the police do? The police stand down. They let the violence brew. They let the violence ferment until it becomes an angry mob cocktail. And you know what's going to happen? At some point, they're not going to stand down anymore. They will not stand down, and they will begin to take people away. And it doesn't matter if you're wearing an Antifa, urban ninja outfit, or you're sporting a Confederate flag t-shirt while wearing a motorcycle helmet. There's a good chance you're going to be carted off with a boot to the neck. I was watching a video of a demonstration in Portland. There's a guy on the Antifa side, and he's getting in the face of the police in Portland, and Homeland Security was part of this event. And he's getting in the face, and F you, F you, F you, and then all of a sudden, one of these guys, he's surrounded by these guys who are in their riot gear, basically impenetrable, right? I mean, they've got flak jackets on, they've got their helmets, probably have knee pads, elbow pads. And this one guy just takes him down, just sweeps him with his right foot, hits him, throws him down the ground. They all descend on him, and then they use the nylon ties to tie him up and bound him like a pig. And that, boys and girls, is a vision of the world to come. That is a vision of an administration that will allow no dissent on either side. Now, Antifa is being weaponized because they want to. They want to weaponize Antifa. They want to give them as much credibility in the media as possible, because what it does is it rubs it in the face of people who don't have any taste for anarchy and see these people as being filthy and un-American. It really stokes those psychic fires. But they also want to support Antifa because they want the numbers to grow. They want to give people a sense of social acceptance, consent. And when that happens, I want to get involved. I don't like where America is headed. We're headed towards a fascist state. President Trump is a racist. On and on and on. You know the tropes, you know the memes, and they will capitalize on it, and their numbers will grow. And as their numbers grow, the potential for conflict at a larger level also escalates with it. So the next thing you know, we have this massive conflagration that takes place in the American streets. And who will be there ultimately to have the people stand down? Keep in mind we got 3 generals in the White House. Keep in mind that Trump has decided to allow the local police departments to deploy more militarized equipment. And the militarization of the police department has been going on since 9/11. Because what happens is when they have the old gear that is no longer sort of up to date, up to spec in places like Iraq or Syria, wherever, there's a great resale market for it in the United States with local police departments. And some of them have tanks because they bought them through money that's being dispersed and has been dispersed by DHS since 9/11. So local police departments get a significant amount of money to go to Las Vegas and go to these conventions where they buy this stuff. Resale. Now, they can't use that money to hire more police, but they can buy more equipment. So what is Trump going to allow? What more can they allow besides tanks, which are, at this point, even allowable? Well, I'll tell you, the biggest weapon that they'll have at their disposal is the LRADs. And the LRADs produce either extremely high-pitched frequencies or extreme heat for crowd control. Anyway, with the militarization of the police, from a technological perspective, shortly after that, the tactical will also be allowed to come into play as well. So essentially, what will happen is that the local police departments will be like small armies. And Trump loves the police. Remember, he's got Mars on the ascendant. So we're just bringing all this together here to show you kind of what's happening. And to the extent that the left-right paradigm has been charged. It has been charged to create more dissent, more friction, more fraction, and ultimately will become potentially the showdown between the American people on the streets of the United States. And of course, at that point in time, the police will no longer stand down. All right. That's about it for today's show. It took me a while to get going today. waking up earlier in a different time zone, my cells haven't kicked in. They don't kick in until a little bit later. But I don't want to do the show later in the day anyway. So tomorrow, I'll be back again, 24 hours from today. We'll round it up, and we'll be back on Friday, and I'll have my body rising on Texas time. So when Friday rolls around, I'll be up and at 'em and ready to go. And what do you do with all the information that I shared today? Well, you're informed, number one. Number two, it really, I think, serves us to see that there's an agenda at play. And the agenda really is to divide and conquer, get people frothing at the mouth, and then implement their goal, which is to wipe out all dissent. And it doesn't matter if it's left or right, dissent itself will no longer be allowed. That's the goal. That is the goal here. So if you know that, then theoretically what you understand is you don't get sucked in and drawn into it as much as possible. Now, there are distinctions that we have to make, just like with yesterday's show about if we project too much into this whole idea of being a conspiracy theorist, and even the left has their version now of conspiracy theories, right? They have it now. If we buy into that too much, then literally what we're doing is we're living our projections and we're living through our fears. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that there are operations, there are programs, there are agendas that are in the works. So, we just tread that razor's edge of awareness. And you know what happens when you do it all the time? You get better at it. You get better at seeing things and not getting completely sucked in emotionally. And then you can begin to make adjustments and you can adapt your course of action accordingly. So remember, and I've used this before, the great Sufi maxim, tether your camel first and then trust in God. And in my own words, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and you've been listening to 15 Minutes of Flame.